Was the religious right really galvanized by abortion, or was something else going on? Well, Randall Balmer's new book, Bad Faith, makes a pretty provocative case. Let me tell you what I thought. Welcome to Books and Big Ideas, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, with Joel Wentz. Okay, I have here Randall Balmer's surprisingly tiny, this is barely 100 pages, surprisingly short, concise little book, Bad Faith, just came out. So like I usually do, I'll go through the main idea, research, readability, and the reasonableness. So the main idea here is fairly simple, although it's very bold and very provocative. And Balmer is making the case that the religious right was actually not sparked and galvanized by abortion, namely by Roe v. Wade and that court decision, but it was actually galvanized by resistance to the IRS trying to desegregate schools. Namely, what they did is they would go after schools that were de facto segregated, maybe not like legally but unofficially segregated, and the IRS was going after them to remove their tax-exempt status because they were faith-based or religiously affiliated schools. And Balmer is arguing that it was the encroachment of the IRS to remove this tax-exempt status from schools like Bob Jones, that was actually the thing that sparked the religious right. And it's since become almost mythologized as though to be all about abortion and all about Roe versus Wade. He's making a very clear, bold, like I said, bold, provocative, and in his mind, very clear case that is not actually what happened historically. So that's the main idea, and Bad Faith kind of unpacks that. The research behind it is he dives kind of right in primarily into that 70s era, and so he digs up quotes from folks. He's also done some personal interviews, but he also digs up quotes from people like James Dobson and W.A. Criswell, who was the leader of the Southern Baptist Convention in the 70s, and kind of everything that was happening around Roe v. Wade. He's looking at, and Christianity Today and some of the editorials they published. He's looking at what were evangelical leaders saying at the actual time of Roe v. Wade in 1973. What was their assessment then? And so he uses a lot of quotations and did some research. Did do some research. He's an historian, so he knows how to do this research around that era. And then he tries to chart when things actually started to shift. Namely when abortion became a galvanizing issue, which he makes the case doesn't happen until the later 70s into even the 80s and the Reagan era. And so his research is really kind of constrained to that decade, but he does do primary research in the sense of he does have actual quotations from things people actually wrote and said at that time, and it's easy to find them, it's easy to chase them down if you want to verify where they're at or where they come from. Now, that's the research. The readability of this book. So this is, I want to say a couple things about this because I was shocked when I saw how short this book is, and I literally sat down and read it in less than an hour. It's super, super quick. It's also extremely, it's not only short, it's extremely readable, extremely clear. You just kind of can work right through it. So it's not obtuse, it's not hard to grasp what he's getting at all. Super, super readable, probably one of the most readable kind of books I've read in a long time. However, that brevity, that kind of conciseness, that the length, the shortness of it is both a strength and I would argue a weakness at the same time. And so that leads me to the last thing I want to say, which is the reasonableness. I will say overall, Balmer is for sure has his finger on something. It's really hard to look at some of the quotations that he pulls up. You can read writings from Christianity Today, which is a very conservative evangelical publication, still is. You can read writings from that magazine that are equivocating on whether or not abortion, maybe you can read them saying things like, there are times in which maybe abortion can be a moral or at least a morally permissible option. And you can read other quotations of other very prominent conservative evangelicals in around 1973, 74 saying things like, there's one quote in there of a leader saying, I've always thought that a human didn't have its own kind of life until it was actually outside of the womb anyways. You read stuff like that in light of the past 40 years of what the moral majority and the religious right has pounded on about abortion. You read those quotes now and it is staggering to think about a leader of that prominence saying something like that today about abortion. It's just unbelievably staggering. So he's definitely on he has his finger on something when he says that at the time of Roe v. Wade, it was not this like electrifying thing, and we've kind of revised history to think that it was about that. I think he's right in broad strokes. However, the shortness of the book, I think, leaves out some answers, some questions and some answers that I really think need to be kind of probed into. One of which is, I think race, I think that the IRS and the tax-exempt status, I definitely think he's right that those are really important things that we need to reassess our understanding of when it comes to the rise of the religious right. However, there were other cultural issues going on at the time too. I think that the Supreme Court in the 60s and 70s, a lot of the decisions of the Supreme Court were handing down, things like prayer in schools and stuff, that aren't explicitly about race or racial segregation, but nevertheless signal a shifting culture. I think those things are important to talk about when you think about what galvanized the religious right. That's not really addressed here, namely that Supreme Court era. I also think that another thing that he doesn't address is that what happened in the wake of the Roe v. Wade decision. I think there's an historical argument to be made that abortion and the way abortions kind of skyrocketed and just the numbers of abortions that started to happen after Roe v. Wade, I think a reasonable argument can be made that a lot of these leaders didn't realize the implications of the court case and how they would ripple out in the years after, and therefore it could be years later that then this kind of awakening could happen. I think there's an argument made there. I don't want to make the pendulum swing either way, because I want to be clear, I think he's onto something very, very crucial and very important that is too often overlooked. But I would say that I think the length of the book being so short, so quick to get through, and so kind of concise in the few points he's making, leaves out some of those other questions that would buttress just a more fulsome historical account of the rise of the religious right. That being said, he's bringing an important issue into the conversation, and I think that one of my overall takeaways to this is that it's dangerous, just like any sort of history, any sort of social analysis, it's dangerous to flatten it, it's dangerous to simplify it down to one silver bullet factor, namely something like abortion, but I also wouldn't want to push the pendulum in the other direction and make it only about race or segregation. Like I said, I think that that's an important factor that dare not be overlooked and does need to be reclaimed in our understanding of the religious right. But I would worry about some of those other things being left out of the conversation that are really important, and certainly can account for at least some of the kind of the political mobilization that happened in that era. That all being said, those are my thoughts on the reasonableness of this short little book by Randall Balmer. I would highly recommend it, particularly if you've never revisited the legacy of the religious right and you have no idea what he's talking about with this IRS tax exemption kind of paradigm shift that started to happen around Jimmy Carter and into Reagan. Man, this is a really excellent book. And like I said, it's super short, super easy to read. You can get it and read it in a day or two maybe, and it's really, really worth that time because of the analysis that he offers. So there you go. Hope that you found this helpful. Thank you for watching. If other books like this are on your radar that you'd like me to take a look at, just let me know.